Det för att jag måste önska formensalt. First of all, Mr. Ambassador, it's a great honor to have you here in Mali. And as you can see, we are going to play for you in a little minute. But first of all, I would like to say why I'm doing this, because I've got this question a lot of times during the last days. And there are mainly three reasons. The first one is that my family is from Tervåg, on the west coast of Norway. And during the Second World War, the Germans had a retaliation action there. So I can say that in my family we have a large sympathy, great deal of sympathy for the Israeli people, Jewish people. But when my relatives returned from the concentration camps in Sachsenhausen, they returned to a state at the age of 40 years. Norway in 1945 was 40 years old as an independent state. All Jews in the concentration camps have nowhere to return to. That's the first reason. The second reason I'm doing this is because my union, the musicians union in Norway, decided to go for a boycott of Israel. And to be honest, it really pissed me off. And I decided from that day on to work actively on the side of Israel, because I think it was outrageous to speak for a boycott of a people, of a nation, a state. It's just stupid. That's the second reason. And the third reason I'm doing this is curiosity. I am a non-religious person. I think I know a lot about Israeli military tactics and everything, all that stuff, but I do not know anything, almost anything about Jewish culture, Jewish people, Israeli people, and anything. And the easiest way to get knowledge is to, maybe then to invite the Israeli ambassador to Mali to talk about it. So that's the third reason. It's just curiosity from my side, and also to show the ambassador and the people of Israel that most Norwegians, absolutely most Norwegians, are quite sensible, reasonable people who doesn't boycott. And all because of that, I have two friends with me today, which I would like to introduce. One of my closest friends and pals, Alan Jentoft on saxophone. And also one of my closest friends, Elvin Vanes. They say among musicians in Norway that the top musicians boycott Israel. And that's bullshit, because the top musicians are here at the moment. And I must also do some commercial stuff here. And Alan and I, we are also what you call Yamaha Artist Europe. That's quite hard to get. So that gives us a certain kind of credibility in the music community. So I think we also send a signal to the rest of the musicians and artists in Norway that we do not boycott anyone. I doesn't even boycott the North Koreans or feminist groups or anything. So we would like to play a tune for you, and we mostly play by heart. We don't use music, but we found this tune, and it was very hard, much harder to play than we imagined. So we will have to use music on it, because it's quite tricky to play actually. And because it's difficult to play, we will play it a little bit faster than musicians used to do. And
close our eyes.
Yeah. And the tune is an old jazz standard by John Carisi, and it's some kind of little melancholy, sad song in minor, but it has a very special name, and that's what we are playing. A special and beautiful name, and the song is called Israel. So with this we start, and afterwards we will finish playing. It's all yours, with some of that. sant, vi har notestativ, det er også det at jeg bruker å få klagemål på trompeten så sterkt. Altså hvis dere begynner å få ørene, så spiller jeg ned i notestativet. Det bruker å være veldig ofte. Vent litt. Ja, den er klar. Ok?
Do you hear me or should I use this? I should use this. Okay. Good evening. Should I press it all the time or just
No, I
once?
think it will work automatically.
Okay, I hope so. We are going to speak maybe a little bit about innovation and high technology, but sometimes it's the old technologies that tends to fail us. Anyway, thank you very much everybody for being here. And I'm really deeply moved and very much appreciative, Ronnie, of the initiative. Well, maybe since you have mentioned the boycott of the musicians, I should start by inviting you to June, to come to Israel in June, because there is a concert of some unknown Norwegian musicians called Aha in Tel Aviv. So apparently the boycott doesn't work so well. On a serious note, I would say that I usually prefer the Q&A, the questions and answers, because then I know exactly what is of interest for you. So I will start with, let's say, a few comments about Israel and Norway, about Israel in general, and then maybe I will at some stage put a full stop and let you lead with your comments and questions, because my experience tells me this is the more interesting part of the evening. Anyway, maybe to start with an anecdote. I've been ambassador to Norway right now for 3.5 years almost, which means that I'm going to conclude my mission in the summer or in the fall. But the anecdote goes back to the beginning, when I arrived in Norway immediately after the 2014 war that was waged against Israel by Hamas from Gaza, what we know also as the Operation Protective Edge. And I arrived at Norway really very few days after the fire was over. And about 10 days after my arrival, I presented my credentials to His Majesty King Harald. And he was very well briefed about the situation in the region. You know that when a new ambassador arrives, the protocol is presenting credentials to the sovereign. In Israel it's the president, here it's the king. And then there is a short conversation, 20 minutes, sometimes a little bit more. So we were speaking about the region, about the wars that just ended, about Iran as a regional negative power, which is an issue that we can talk in a little bit later in more detail. But then at one point, I told the king that my intention is to dedicate as small portion of my time to big issues of politics or policy, conflicts in the Middle East, because at the end of the day, even though some Norwegians might think differently, the conflicts in the Middle East are not going to be solved in Oslo. They are going to be solved, if and when they are going to be solved in the Middle East, when the sides that are involved will reach some kind of decisions that they are interested in solving them. So I thought that my main interest should be in working the Israeli-Norwegian relations. And in that context, I told the king that these relations, that Norway in a way became extremely relevant from an Israeli perspective in recent years, since in 2009 we have discovered oil and gas, especially gas in our continental shelf in the Mediterranean. And suddenly we were looking around us who had the knowledge, and we saw a good example of a country that handles its way in this field, and in a way is a world leader. So the king, who is a very nice person and a very open person, he immediately said to me very frankly that he never heard that Israel found oil and gas back in 2009. So since the king gets his briefings from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I later on, in one of the conversations with my good friends in your ministry, I told them, and the soundbite was, guys, you have not briefed the king about the state of Israel, you briefed him about the state of conflict. And if you'd like, this in a nutshell is the main challenge for an Israeli ambassador in Norway, or maybe this is the abnormal situation in the Norwegian public opinion. You can be in favor of Israel or against Israel, but you usually determine your position according to the conflict, which, with all due respect, I believe is a stupid thing to do. Because when you do that, what you basically are doing, you are taking a reductionist approach, which narrows Israel to the niche of the conflict. It does not exist beyond the conflict. People don't know anything about Israel beyond the conflict, and frequently what they think they know, they don't know. We can speak also about the media in that respect. But at the end of the day, when I started working my calendar of activity in the embassy, I've decided that I will dedicate at least half of my time to issues that are not conflict related. And from looking back to this period of time, Well, sometimes the issue just demands that, of course, you will deal with it. I was in a way fortunate that for these last years, the reality between Israel and Palestinians has been relatively quiet. There is also a wider context. I mean, people not only in Norway, but I would say that worldwide, came to acknowledge that the Middle East is a region in turmoil or in turbulence, and in this context, suddenly this conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, which is important for Israelis and Palestinians, is only one, I would say, relatively minor conflict, while you are looking at the wider Middle East, genocide in Syria, countries actually disappear from real existence. I'm speaking about Libya, Iraq, and other focuses of turmoil in what was once called the Arab Spring. Anyway, if we go back to Israel, we are going next May to celebrate, or April even, to celebrate 70 years of existence. And this is maybe a good opportunity to invite those of you who can do it to come to a very big festive evening in Oslo on April 29th. This is not organized by us, by the embassy, but by the good friends of Israel in Norway, by MIF. And if you can attend it, it will be a very nice evening. So 70 years ago, Israel was created 3 years after the end of World War II. Now, you mentioned the reality in the West Coast. I was born in 1957 in Israel, so Israel was 9 years old, and at the time, and I'm the first generation of Israeli-born generation. Both my parents were born in Germany. They belong to the generation that when they were teenagers, they had to escape because of the Nazi regime. And when they were at their 20s, they had to fight at the battlefields of our war of independence in 1948. And the starting point was very difficult in the sense that these were people, mainly refugees from Europe. Some of them were more veteran because there was a Jewish, let's say, immigration to that land in growing numbers since the second half of the 19th century, but the big waves of immigrants came during the 30s and the 40s and later. So at its first moment of independence in 1948, Israel had 600,000 people of population. Today we are 8.8 million. It's a country that started with, I would say, a vision of becoming an agricultural country, but this has been converted during the years to a technological power. Today, really the innovation, the high technology is the biggest motor of the economy. I had a meeting, a very interesting meeting today at Sintef, and I was surprised to learn about the wide cooperation between Sintef and Israeli companies, something that is going on below the radar of my embassy and of the Norwegian embassy in Israel, and this is good. I mean, when things happen without needing the need of bureaucrats like us to make them happen, that's the best way. All that we can do in such cases is enjoy it and not interfere. because as the Americans say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I believe, though, that we can do a lot more. Because when I look at the numbers and when I look at the export charts on both sides, I can still see that the main articles that we are buying from Norway is salmon. Now, I like salmon, don't get me wrong, but I believe that we can do a lot more on technology. And of course, when I speak technology, I speak related to oil and gas, related to cyber, which is a growing thing, related to medical equipment. All of these fields are important for you, are important for us. And since the world becomes smaller because of the nature of communication, also the challenges become, I would say, basically more similar. So if we are speaking about cyber, then this is something that doesn't know boundaries, and we should also deal with it with no boundaries and with no borders. And this is something that we should do. Basically, this is a society, and I'm coming back to maybe what I call the collective Israeli DNA. I mean, we are in the Middle East. We are the only non-Muslim country in the Middle East, the only country with Jewish majority in the world. We are the homeland of the Jewish people. And you mentioned, Ronnie, that you are not a believer, so it makes two of us. The problem is that many times people don't understand the issue of Judaism in its complexity, because Judaism is not a religion, or at least it's not only a religion. People can be like me, 100% secular and non-believers, and at the same time 100% Jewish, because Judaism is a nation, far beyond the issue of whether you believe or don't believe. Now, the term Zionism, that sometimes is used in certain circles as a curse or a bad word, is nothing else than the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. Because at one point, the Jews arrived at the conclusion, and this started at the 19th century, that the same way all nations in Europe started to form in nation states, Jews need the same solution. And this thinking has been evolving more and more towards the end of the 19th century, then in the 20th century. Then you could see, people who know history know that by the 100 years ago, at the 20 of last century, there was already a kind of a de facto state, or at least state mechanisms functioning under British mandate. There was the Hebrew universities, there was the leadership of the Jews under British mandate. We even had at that time established some armed forces. We established on the other side, the cultural side, the Philharmonic Orchestra, and all the institutions that later formed part of Israel were already in place. It took 20 more years, and of course the tragedy of Second World War to make it happen, but the beginning was there. We also must remember we have celebrated 100 years in last November to the Balfour Declaration. That was the first time that the international community, in that case Britain, acknowledged the right of the Jews for their own homeland in that part of the world, and this has been later acknowledged and recognized by the League of Nations and later on by the UN. So this was, in a nutshell, the development of history. I think I will put a full stop here because, as I said, I'm interested in hearing what are your questions and spheres of interest, and I will open this to you. So thank you very much. I'm always looking for the brave one to be the first, then it's easier.
Okay, may I start?
Yeah, please.
I was wondering if you could put yourself into a time machine, travel back in time, and if you had an opportunity to be a Jewish leader at one point in history, which one would you have been, and what would you have done differently than the leader at the moment?
Well, this is something that deserves some reflection, but I would say that maybe the easiest, it won't be a long journey, it will be rather a short one, relatively short. So my choice is to be David Ben-Gurion, and what I would have done differently would have been, I think, giving Israel a constitution, because we don't have one, and it's a source of, well, it's not a clear-cut issue, because it has advantages too, because when you don't have a constitution, you have to work on your consensus all the time. The problem is that when the population is so heterogeneous as it is in Israel, it is sometimes very difficult to find this consensus, and this is a source of permanent political instability, which is maybe the biggest deficiency of our system. You know what Churchill said about democracy. It's a terrible system. The problem is that all other systems are bad or worse. And he also said that you learn about the deficiencies of democracy by a 5-minute conversation with an average voter. This is Churchill, not me. And so if I had to choose, I would tell Ben-Gurion, guy, make a constitution because it will help our system. I mean, one of the issues in which I really envy Norway is that in your system you have elections every 4 years to the day. I mean, and in the meantime you have a government and you have a parliament and they function. In our system, I don't remember when was the last time that we had a government that ruled the country for 4 years. We always have crises and early elections, and it's like an ongoing election campaign, and it's not a healthy environment for a country to handle itself. And of course, it's not. We are not Switzerland. We have some issues on our plate. The Swiss have them too, but they are quite different.
Yeah, I would like to look at one of the other countries in the region, Iran, and what's going on now with, especially on a day like this, on the women liberation demonstrations. And how do you think this will end compared to how they demonstrated in Iran during Obama's office, where there were no help from the United States for the demonstrants? Do you think it could be different this time? Could it be a different outcome?
Well, I guess that few of you heard that a woman that took out her hair coverage as a protest was sentenced for 2 years in prison in Iran today. Now, Iran, in contrast with many Arab Muslim countries, has a civil society, a very developed one. We must remember that Iran is not Arab, it's Muslim. And there is a tendency, if you speak with Irani people, or if you speak for that matter with Turkish people, which also are Muslim but not Arab, you can feel many times the contempt that comes from Muslim countries who are not Arab towards Arab countries that are Muslim too. I don't share it because I come from a country that has 77% Jews and about 15% Arab Muslims. So I don't have the, I don't think it's true, and I also don't have the, I would say, the luxury to treat Arab people with contempt the way they are being treated by Iran or by Turkish people, and you can feel it if you are in close contact with them. The question, what is going to happen in Iran at the end, is an open one. Nobody knows. There is an ongoing bubbling in middle and low socio-economic strata in Iran. Those people are, as I said, they have institutions, they have civil societies, they want to live better, and they want to be basically free like every other person. Now, I cannot tell you if and when this will burst. I also cannot tell you what policy the administration of the United States will take. We hear very strong rhetorics coming from the United States regarding the nuclear issue with Iran, which we completely share. We believe that the deal that has been signed with Iran by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany was a very bad agreement, because in 10 or 15 years time, it gives Iran basically a free pass to become a nuclear power. And guys, this is really a nightmare. I mean, you can see what Iran is doing in the region today without having nuclear power. They are involved in every subversive and negative focus that you can think about. I mean, Syria, they are there big time. And so they are also in Lebanon, Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. Wherever there is an opportunity to interfere, to promote terrorism and unrest, Iran is there, in the middle. Now imagine all of that when they have the confidence acquired by having a nuclear capability. It's really a terrible idea, and I hope very much that the international community will come to senses and will amend the agreement in a way that will make it impossible for Iran to get these capabilities. I can't tell you, again, I don't know if this, the American administration will do more for the people of Iran than the previous one. Because speaking generally, this administration doesn't have the tendency to interfere. They are more reluctant to interfere than previous American governments, not including the Obama administrations that also pulled out of many areas. But you know, vacuums are filled. If the United States is not going to be there, other players are going